Only one, Jen.
Recording in progress.
Is everybody ready to rock and roll?
I just opened it up, so.
All right.
David, are you ready? We're ready on our end.
All right. All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us in honor of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. My name is Adrienne Billings-Smith, Equity Coordinator for the town of West Hartford, and we'd like to welcome you to today's webinar honoring AANHPI Voices in the Workplace. A huge thank you to West Hartford Community Interactive for your continued partnership and for hosting this webinar, and also live on our local channel and WHCI YouTube. I'd like to take a moment and introduce our panelists and thank them for being here today. This is a really exciting, group of people. I know all of them. This is going to be an amazing panel today. So with that being said, let's get started. Today we have Kim King, who is the 2022 Connecticut State Teacher of the Year, is an art teacher in Mansfield, Connecticut. Over her 15-year career, she has taught students from pre-K to 12th grade. Regardless of grade level, she consistently emphasizes themes of equity, empowerment, and creativity. As a transracial, intercountry adoptee and the parent of an adopted daughter and a biracial transgender son, King possesses a profound understanding of intersectionality. She firmly believes that what students see and are exposed to matters greatly. It's essential for students to encounter accurate representations of themselves to envision a future where they can be active contributors. Recently, King collaborated with fellow AAPI State Teachers of the Year to establish a collective aimed at recruiting and supporting current AAPI teachers while also developing resources. King holds a Master's of Art Education from NYU and a Bachelor of Fine Art from Syracuse University. Welcome, Kim. Next, we have Caroline Tanbee-Smith. Caroline Tanbee-Smith serves as the Alder for Ward 9 on the City of New Haven Board of Alders. Prior to being elected, Caroline was one of the co-founders of CoLab, a community accelerator supporting early-stage entrepreneurs in Greater New Haven. Outside of CoLab, Caroline has also co-founded local volunteer organizations, including New Haven Bike Month and AAPI New Haven. For her work, she has received the Yale Jefferson Award for Public Service, City of New Haven Individual Innovator Award, and one of the New Haven Independent's Under 30s New Haveners of the Year. Welcome, Caroline. I think we are missing Riju today, or he'll be a few minutes late, so hopefully he'll come in soon. Next, we have Dr. Quan Tran. She is a 1.5 generation Vietnamese American who hails from a refugee background. She is a multilingual educator with research, teaching, and consulting experience in the fields of Asian American studies, critical refugee studies, and the Vietnamese diaspora studies. Dr. Tran is deeply committed to and finds joy in collaborative work that uplifts, empowers, and connects underrepresented communities in the state of Connecticut. She is also a translator and poet. I did not know the poet piece. Lastly, and welcome, Dr. Quan Tran. Lastly, we have Jeremy Chen. Jeremy has been an Emmy-nominated reporter at NBC Connecticut since September 2022. He has reported on various issues across our state, from housing to education and politics. Jeremy is passionate about highlighting the AANHPI community, especially underrepresented groups that usually don't appear on local news. He can also be seen weeknights on NBC Connecticut News at 11 p.m. All right, welcome, Jeremy, and welcome all. Again, thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited about this virtual panel. We do this for our Heritage Months, but I think it's important to do this. One is all of your profiles is said to highlight, empower, and show representation of all of our communities, and to get voices out who haven't, traditionally or historically been able to have their voices be heard in such ways within our community. So I will start, and I'll just call someone out based on who I see on the screen, and I will start that way if everyone's okay with that. And then we can kind of go around from there. So my first question, just the opening question, like usual, is can you tell everyone a little about your professional journey and how you learn it, how you landed in your current position? And I will start with Kim.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for inviting me. I came to teaching a little bit late. I started out my career in New York City trying to make a living as a commercial photographer. I realized very quickly that it was not as creative as I wanted, and it also kind of lacked that purpose I was looking for, fulfillment. And so I've been teaching 16 years now. I would have to say I haven't really stepped into a leadership role. It's been in the last 4 years that I've kind of decided to kind of look beyond the four walls of my classroom and expand my view. It kind of coincided with the pandemic and Stop Asian Hate, Black Lives Matter. And I think that it was at the point where I had attended my maybe third walk, and I realized this isn't accomplishing what I want to accomplish, and how can I use my skill set to impact change. And so that's when I decided to do a little research and reach out, and I've met some amazing individuals that have inspired me to kind of step into a leadership role.
Thank you for that. And I think, a lot of us on the screen right now, with everything that was happening 4 years ago, and before that, I think each of us had it before that, but being able to step in and find community after that was really important. And I thank you for, the work that you're doing right now. So I will move on to Jeremy.
Hey, thank you, Adrian, for having me on this panel. So, uh, I've been in Connecticut for now about a year and a half. I literally came to the state to take the job at NBC Connecticut. I never thought a kid from Southern California would be moving all the way across the country to Connecticut, but here we are. I've been doing news for nearly 10 years now, and the way TV news works is fairly nomadic. You move from, really small places to larger places as you move on in your career. Eventually, ideally, in most cases, you want to get to like big cities like in LA or New York or anything like that. And originally, I thought that was kind of my trajectory as well, but it's been quite a journey, moving from place to place, from starting my career in 2015 in Little Eureka, California, where I was a one-man band reporter. My news director boss was also the anchor, the executive producer, also wearing many hats. And it was a tough time trying to transition right out of college. But once I got that year of experience, was able to sort of come back home to Southern California and Palm Springs, worked there for 3 years, absolutely loved it. But unfortunately, you don't make that much money, working in that particular market. You can't really live in California, Southern California, especially on 32,000 a year. So you gotta move on, which is where I went to Vegas after that for 3 years, where did a lot of work, worked through COVID. That's where I really essentially got my hands into really what was going on with the AAPI community, which has a large community in Las Vegas, really ingrained with them and whatnot. And did a lot of stories, got a lot of exclusives, highlighted stories that other stations were not covering simply. And about a year and a half ago, I was applying to other jobs, and NBC approached me. Originally, I was applying to go to the Bay Area, but they asked me, "Hey, would you consider coming to Connecticut?" I'm like, "What?" But then after some discussions with the news director and everything, it wound up being a great fit. I've been able to do a lot of stories about the community here in Connecticut. I'm glad I have this opportunity. And yeah, this is where I am for now.
Well, awesome. We're so happy to have you in Connecticut. I'm sure you're missing Vegas a little bit some days when the winter comes in Southern Cal. But you know, seeing ourselves in our stories and us telling our stories are very important to how we also receive them, right? As a viewer, as a consumer of news, seeing ourselves in it, knowing the voice that's coming from behind it, I think is really important. So I thank you for what you're doing, and I do enjoy, you know, watching you on the news. So thank you for being here, Jeremy. How about Caroline next?
Thank you so much, Adrian. It's just such a privilege to be here. I have my pen and paper. I'm going to take down a lot of notes and learn so much from my fellow panelists today. Yeah, so I've been in New Haven now for about 13 years. I grew up originally in Kentucky. My dad also grew up in the South, and my mom immigrated from South Korea here in her 20s. And maybe not as long as a plane ride as Jeremy, but took a long plane ride to New Haven about 13 years ago and just completely fell in love with the city for so many reasons. It's a city with so much fight and a city with so much heart. It's also a city where I could walk down the block and go to Mrs. Kim's Oriental Pantry and get kimbap that tasted like my mom's. Um, and I frankly, you know, growing up in Kentucky, saw more members of the API community here in Connecticut than I'd ever seen before. And so, for many different reasons, I just fell in love with New Haven and hope to be here for the rest of my life. And my professional background is really focused on inclusive economic development. So, I co-founded an organization called Collab with actually another Korean woman, Margaret, who also grew up in Kentucky, interestingly enough. And the real heartbeat of that is that I think something that's so special about this city is that it has an enviable entrepreneurial culture. People want to build things that impact their neighborhood. And the spirit of collab is, can we make that easier? Can we make that pathway easier for individuals, regardless of their background, to be able to start something that impacts their neighborhood? Um, and and then most recently, I was elected to the City of New Haven Board of Alders just in November. And so about 6 months into the role, and it's been a really rewarding and meaningful experience. And I'm interested in a lot of the same questions that I was with Collab. You know, how do we build an economy that works for everybody? How do we make it easier for people to start things here and impact their neighborhood in a positive way?
Awesome. Thank you, Caroline. Fellow Southerner here from Florida. So welcome, right? I've been up here for 11 years now. My son's 11. So yeah, it's really interesting, different dynamic, but I love Connecticut as well. And New Haven's a great city. I do love West Hartford more, but New Haven is a great city. So thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing with the community to invest in your communities. And last but not least, Kwan, welcome.
Thank you, Adrian, for having me here. And I'm loving this panel so much because I'm already learning more about folks that I've been interacting with in one capacity or another. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with me and other people who are watching this. So my professional pathway trajectory has always been in the field of education. I came to the States when I was 12 as a refugee or a child refugee from Vietnam. And then I spent 12 years, 12 more years in Southern California. So hi there, Jeremy. And I went to undergraduate at UC Irvine. And then my partner found a job in Connecticut. So then I followed him here. And that was then that I decided about 2006 that I wanted to go to graduate school. And pursue a research project that I've been thinking about as an undergrad. So then I went to Yale as a grad student in the American Studies program with a specialization on the Vietnamese diaspora and Asian American studies. And at the time, the field of critical refugee studies was emerging towards the tail end of my graduate studies. And so that became also another area of concentration. And because of these three areas, I ended up being able to find a position at Yale and continued on as a senior lecturer. And so that path of education has been the only thing that I know. So I joke around that I've been in school since I was 4. And I must be now in 33rd grade. So, but yeah, it's been a very fulfilling path. And I love everything about the work that I do. I have such a privilege to be able to work with young people in the classroom and thinking about how to equip them with knowledge and toolkits so that they could go out in the community, in the wider world, and contribute their pieces to it.
Thank you for that. And, you know, Quan and I have worked together on numerous projects now for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's just been a privilege to learn from you and grow through, you know, what you're trying to do to make our world better. And I just appreciate everything that you do. I think we have Riju on the line. I'll let him get settled. Hi, Riju.
Hi guys, I'm sorry I'm late.
No problem. Riju, we were just finishing up kind of telling about your personal journey and your professional journey. If you'd like to pop in, it would actually be a perfect time before we hit our next question. If you want to talk about your personal, a little bit about yourself. We did some introductions and then talk about your professional journey and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. Well, thank you, Adrian, for having me, and thank you to the town of West Hartford. So I'm next door in Farmington. So it's great to be with you guys today, and thank you for the opportunity. Um, I when I graduated college, it was the Bush years, so I didn't really get right into politics and public policy advocacy. I started off in the private sector and then transitioned into the public policy advocacy space a few years later, working in the state legislature, and then for Treasurer Denise Napier, for Senator Blumenthal. So I'm a civil rights attorney now. So while I was after working for elected officials, politicians, campaigns, I went to law school specifically to do legal work in the public policy advocacy space. So working for Senator Blumenthal at the time, the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown happened. And we were fighting the NRA and the gun lobby on gun policy, and a lot of the debate centered on legal issues and the Second Amendment and constitutional issues. And so it wasn't just a matter of advocating, your feelings and policy wise, but on this particular issue, there was a lot of legal aspects to it. And so going to law school and kind of learning how to speak the language and better speak to those opposed on issues like doing more to reduce gun violence, I think has helped me. And now being in civil rights, I think it's, in addition to gun violence and affordability and so many other issues, I think representation and opportunities for those who have been left behind is one of the biggest issues of our time right now. Whether it's your gender, your race, your disability, your income status, your religion, sexual orientation, all of these are civil rights issues. And so what I'd like to do is fight for the marginalized, the voiceless, for those whom the status quo is not working. It has not worked. It needs change. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And thank you for the opportunity, Adrian.
Absolutely. Thank you, Riju. I fellow attorney here. See, I have a little connection to everyone. And thank you for, the work that you're doing on the civil rights front and the legal work, and going back and challenging yourself to go to law school. That is no small feat. We all know that. So, doing that work is so important. And as we sit here in honor of AANHPI Month and talking about the lack of representation in some of these professions, especially the legal profession, I think it might be below 2% for AANHPI attorneys in the United States. So I appreciate you doing that work. It's hard, it's strenuous, and it's always a continued fight. So thank you for being here, and no problem on being late. We're here to welcome you. So I'm going to move on to our second question, then I'm going to go in another order so everybody gets some time to start. So as you assess your current professional status, can you speak about the importance of a professional environment that fosters an environment of authenticity, i.e. culture versus compliance? And I will start with Jeremy on this one.
No, absolutely. It's I have found it to be, especially within TV news, a striking evolution, especially when you move from place to place in the environments, the newsroom environments that you are in. The very early beginnings of my career, straight out of college, you're still kind of learning the ropes. You're still getting butterflies going live on TV. It's not something, even though I had an excellent education at USC in Southern California, a great journalism school, there's nothing like actually being in a professional environment and in front of actual viewers that sets you up for what you're going to be doing. And for me, it was at the time, I wasn't thinking too much about my identity, partially because the places that I lived at had such a minuscule population. Not necessarily that I ignored my identity. There were a number of viewers who were Asian that recognized me on TV. Even in my first market, I was more recognizable than our main anchor because they didn't have an Asian, you're that Asian guy on TV. That's what they would say. But for me, I had to just get through to, understanding the structure of, doing the story right. I had to shoot my own video, making sure the video is good. So I was thinking about just the very basic things about my job and, keeping my job in order to succeed. It wasn't until I got to Palm Springs that I felt like I could be a little bit more of my authentic self. I didn't have to do as much. I got to work with photographers. The managers were very willing to work with me on certain stories, and we wound up doing a story about Chinese tourism in the nearby desert outlets over there, which none of the managers realized that was even a thing until I told them. So we wound up doing a story on that. As I mentioned before, you can't really live on $32,000 a year in Southern California. So that's when I made the move to Vegas, which has a significant AAPI population. And that's where I really got to have a say in our coverage, how we cover the community and everything. It also helped tremendously that I had a manager who was also Asian American and could kind of I could see eye to eye and understand where I'm coming from. So that was a really great way of being able to be more of my authentic self. And he was really the glue that was able to, keep things on track relatively. One thing though that kind of I've noticed was when he left, he left for another job in San Francisco at the time. We had a story about there was a church shooting in Irvine at a Taiwanese church. So I'm Taiwanese myself, and I knew this Taiwanese professor who specifically talked about Taiwan and everything at UNLV and whatnot. There was a lot of confusion in the newsroom as far as the guy's motivations, like why would he, do the shooting and everything. This was after that manager I mentioned left the station and everything like that. And I told them, hey, we got to do a story about, kind of explaining what's going on because there's obviously a lot of confusion. It'd be a great way to educate people. I got the connects. I have the connects in the community. No other station has it. It will be kind of an exclusive angle. I'd say we pursue it, but without him there, the other managers were kind of like, why would our viewers care about that and whatnot? And even sadly, the reporter that actually did a lot of diversity stories even asked the same thing, which kind of shocked me personally. So that was kind of a moment where I felt like, I need to, maybe look elsewhere. So that's what led me eventually here in Connecticut, where I feel very happy, to be sort of my authentic self and be able to, cover the community that historically here in Connecticut has not really been covered as much. And I'm glad, like last year, I was able to cover Kim King, for example, about her journey as a Korean adoptee. That got nominated for an Emmy, so that kind of validated that these stories, are need to be told. And this year, I'm just wrapping up a series of stories on the communities, including finally I'm able to do a story about the Pacific Islander community, which again doesn't really get covered in local news. So the fact that I'm able to be given the tools and given the license to be able to do these stories just tells me everything I needed to know about making the right decision to come over here.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'll move on to Kim. Easy segue.
I'm in awe of this panel as well. I think that authenticity is so important in education and in the spaces of in our schools, because we have a problem in our public schools where we don't have enough teachers of color. And in order to attract and retain teachers, I think that authenticity and trust are at the root of that issue. If you do not feel like you can be your authentic self, then it really doesn't create an environment where you can be creative, where you can be a contributing member to a team, where you feel understood and seen. And so I think that it's so important for our schools to really focus on this issue about how do we build trust, how do we support our teachers of color, not just I'm speaking broadly, but I think the more diversity that we can, our student population is more and more diverse, and our teachers are not reflecting that. As a Korean American, teacher, I have usually been one of the only Asian educators in my building, and oftentimes representing the diversity in the staff, which I think in itself is speaks to issues about model minority and what is accepted as being like you're an accepted person of color that we can have on our staff. I mean, the issues go much deeper, but being an adoptee has kind of added a different layer for me. As I said, I came later to kind of reflecting on my place and my identity. And so for so long, I normalized being one of the only, the exception. And it really wasn't until my year as Teacher of the Year that I met my national cohort. There were 55 teachers from all across the country and districts. And it was the first time I was in a room with other AAPI educators. And we flocked to each other. It was an incredible experience. And it was so eye-opening because I didn't realize what I was missing and what I was suppressing. So it was kind of a long way about it.
No, I think that's important. I think a lot of folks, when we talk about marginalized communities or underrepresented communities, and I think people in general, humans in general, have their points of where they recognize different parts of their identity. But I see it most when you're trying to live up to something that society has set, and you trying to be who you are at the same time, and realize and recognize that because there's so many facets to one person, right? And this piece, when we're talking about whether it be race or ethnicity, is a huge piece of that, because then that speaks to culture as well, right? So, and those are all different things of where your culture comes from. So I think as you grow, it ebbs and flows, and when you start to go, okay, this is who I am, and this is where this fits in on my puzzle, then you start to see the authentic self come out, because now you're comfortable in your space and who you are. So yeah, that makes sense in the flocking piece, right? When you're like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only, talk to me, look at me, don't say anything at all, just be in the space with me. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Not everyone has to answer, but I'll ask Riju, since you came on, what do you think?
Well, I was happy to hear Jeremy's story. One of my biggest gripes in the last several years, with just politics dominating so many conversations that, you know, in friend circles and family gatherings at Thanksgiving dinner table, is, you know, in our state government, our Capitol Press Corps, there's like no diversity whatsoever, none. You know, there's hardly any people of color, if any, that cover state government politics in Hartford. Forget about AAPI people. Very few women. And so that's something that needs to change, because if you're trying to cover stories out there, you're telling it from one perspective, right? There are a lot of perspectives that are missing when you don't have that life experience. So I think that's why it's important to have diversity. You know, oftentimes the word diversity, you know, connotes unqualified people, right? We have to check off a box. And no, it's not about that. Diversity means representation, right? There's, you know, a reason why a lot of businesses and corporations have DEI departments, because it's good for business to be inclusive. It's good for business to have representation. It opens up new markets and new customers and new lines of revenue. And the same thing in the media and in all facets of our society. When more voices are represented, more stories are told. You know, it's good. And so, you know, I think Adrian alluded to this. You know, in the legal profession, I'm part of a group called the South Asian Bar Association of Connecticut, and there are these things called affinity bars throughout Connecticut. There's the Crawford Bar, which represents Black and African American attorneys. There's the Hispanic Bar. There's the East Asian Bar, the South Asian Bar. There's an Italian Bar. But the goal of, I think, most of these affinity groups, certainly for the South Asian Bar that I'm a part of, is to recruit more South Asian people into the legal profession, and then to have more representation in the legal profession as judges, as elected officials, in senior positions in government, where you're at the decision-making table advocating for perspectives. So, like, for example, when you're making a decision when to reopen schools during COVID, and, you know, you're strictly, you know, a white male who grew up in Greenwich, and you're like, we need to reopen these schools right away because kids are, you know, suffering from learning loss. Yes, but also in a lot of families of color, in particular AAPI families, there are multi-generational households where, you know, the grandparents or the parents live with the children, and it's a 3-generation household. So opening up the schools for Asian families means kids going to school and bring COVID home, not only to their parents, but to their grandparents who are more at risk. That's a big issue. So it's not just as simple as open up the schools to, you know, prevent learning loss. If that's your only perspective, you're missing other perspectives. Opening up schools also meant, you know, bullying for AAPI kids, right? We saw a lot of that at the beginning of COVID, and it continued through the pandemic. So if you're not at the decision-making table, if you're not there to give your voice, only one side of the story gets told, and bad policies end up being enacted because you're not covering all perspectives. Now, granted, you can't make everybody happy, and you have to make it, you know, a decision, sometimes quick decisions, where you can't think about every perspective. When I was working for Senator Blumenthal, you know, I was in charge of doing a healthcare event, and I was checking off all my boxes. And then after the event, a friend of mine who works in labor for labor unions, represents workers in Connecticut, came up to me and said, "Hey, the facility you chose to have this roundtable discussion, they're anti-union." And I remember thinking, I was so exhausted by that point. I thought of everything, but no, I didn't. And I went to my boss, and he's like, you know, we can't do it all. Right. So I get that, like, we can't think of everything, but we can't, if we don't have people at the table, we can't even begin to have that conversation. So in the legal profession, we try to get more South Asian people, at least in the South Asian bar, into the legal profession, have them become judges, have them become, you know, partners at their big firms, open up their small firms and businesses. And so one of my goals is not just representing myself and my culture and my family, and but also all people of color and all marginalized people in the legal profession, in the civil rights space, but in society in general, right? Like, you know, in policy making, the legislature just opened up an AAPI caucus, I think a few weeks ago, actually, right? And so, one of the reasons that the justification for the caucus was school bullying, right? There's a lot of school bullying for disabled people and LGBTQ and trans kids, but also AAPI kids. And so, a part of my work is not just in the legal space, but just trying to get people to be more comfortable with who they are. Growing up when you're the only one of you want to fit in and integrate. And I think that affects a lot of immigrant cultures, in particular. When you come over, you want to change your name, you want to change your religion, your culture, act like you're one of them, you belong. So, you're not invisible or you're not bullied. You're not bringing in that food that other people can't stand because it has a unique smell. But at a certain point, you grow up and, cultures change. In Farmington, when I grew up, in my elementary school, I was only one of three kids of color. The other was my brother. Out of 500 kids, it was, that not undiverse. The other day I was helping out with an election in our town at the same school I went to, and I counted like 3 Caucasian white kids out of like 50 other kids. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not the same school I went to. Like, wow, this is amazing. And now you have like clubs of, your culture, and it really helps kids, embrace their identity, their parents and ethnicity and their lineage. And they can bring that education into the classroom, not be embarrassed about it. And then that carries with them into adulthood. And now in the workplace, people are more embracing of change that needs to happen. So, that's what I work on. And I hope we can continue these conversations.
Oh, thank you for that. That's a lot of great work that you're doing, and like you said, it's not just necessarily your profession. I'm gonna ask, Quan and Caroline about their professional piece and authenticity, but it's much bigger than that, right? It's much bigger than just you in a space. And the next question is about being the only you in that space. You recognize it's way bigger than just you in that one space. It's your community. It's a community outside of that. So I'll go to Quan and then Caroline, and then we'll go into the next question and about being the only and how that feels. And how to make, how to recruit a more diverse workforce that's reflective of your community and other, communities of color and marginalized communities. So Quan and Caroline, I'll let you guys hit this question 2 up, and then you can go flow right into question 3 as well, Caroline, when you go.
Okay, thanks, Ace. I would think that in terms of thinking about authenticity in the space, it's actually our superpowers, right? We come in as our authentic selves, and it's usually in the first couple of years that we try to fit into this space and we try to learn what it is about, how it works, that sometimes there's a pressure to let go of some of our authentic selves in order to feel belong in that space. For me, luckily, I think I've been in an environment where the unit that I work in, we are a unit that is very diverse, because that's our charge, right? Is to think about ethnic and racial tensions and dynamics in this country, in its history, as well as contemporary moments. So in that space, I've always felt like I am someone that is bringing another angle into the conversation, and I've always been encouraged to do that. Now, I know that is actually an anomaly in the larger landscape of a private elite university. And I think to be an authentic self in that is to be able to build community, to find allies who could, right, affirm your sense of uniqueness and your diverse point of view, and who can show you the ropes in terms of how institution works. And once we understand those kinds of mechanisms, it allows us to be a little bit even stronger to carve out that space for ourselves. In the position that I work with, I have to be authentic, in terms of among my peers and the professional space, but I'm also an educator in the classroom, right? So that sense of authenticity that I bring into the classroom is really important, because oftentimes I might be the first Southeast Asian professor that my students see in the college classroom setting, right? And that was the case for me when I was an undergraduate as well as at UC Irvine. One of my greatest mentors was the first Vietnamese American professor that I met. And up until that point, I didn't realize that that was actually a professional path that was available to us. And so thinking about authenticity isn't also something for me that we strive to be able to express ourselves, but we also need to make space for those who are coming up behind us, right? To see themselves in a way that they are not just represented, but valued, and that they can take that moment of feeling affirmed, feeling heard and seen, and then go on and create their own things, right? And that's authentic. That's being authentic, and that is a superpower that I think is not something that professional spaces have to accommodate. Is actually what makes professional spaces meaningful, right? That's actually, and we have to think of that as something, not something that we're waiting for other people to allow us, but we claim it. And I think that's, that view is very empowering.
Oh, I love that. Claim it. I think that, that puts you in another headspace when you say claim that space. Thank you for that. Caroline, I'll jump right to you and then go back. I know that Kim talked a bit about recruitment, Riju did. So if you want to jump into that as well, then we'll move forward.
I'd love to. I couldn't agree more with so many of the just thoughtful and moving words of my fellow panelists. I scribbled down from Professor Tran, who you are is your superpower. I think that's incredibly beautifully said. And I think I'll build off what Riju was saying about kind of the role and importance of authenticity in local government and in politics. And yeah, I think that, we can sometimes only go as far as we can imagine for ourselves. And I think something that's powerful about representation is that it expands our imagination of what's possible for us, and especially for young people. And something that I think, obviously I've policy initiatives and goals that matter to me a lot. And I think what I hope to be my use and my value in the role on the board is to represent and demonstrate to especially young people, these seats belong to you, that you are the next alders, you're the next elected officials, you're the next public representatives, if you want to be, if that is a path that you desire. It was powerful during inauguration on January 1st. I brought a group of around 6 to 8 young people, high school students, to come to inauguration, because I wanted to say, hey, this is the space that is yours. It is not separate from you. This belongs to you. A couple other thoughts. I really agreed with Riju about that there's a positive correlation between authenticity and better policy, just full stop. There is that if we create, authentic spaces in local government or on elected boards for people to, cultivate and articulate their lived experience and expertise, that makes for better policy. And then lastly, I think there's been some erosion in trust in government. And I think that authenticity and creating space for authenticity in local government can help rebuild trust in government and see government as a place where not only if you're inside of it, you can make change, but also you can influence it and push it from the outside. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that building into that, the follow-up question around being the only in our organization and role, I think about that. I think about that a lot. And I think certainly with my API identity and also being a member of the LGBTQ community, something that I think a lot about when I talk to young people is, I always talk about that aspect of myself because it's not necessarily a visible part of myself. And I think that visibility is really important. I remember the first day I went door knocking on a campaign was the first day of Pride Month, and I had a rainbow shirt, and I was wondering, should I wear this? when I go door knocking and um, I paused for a second, but then of course I should wear it because I think that's part of the value of me, is to kind of show other, especially LGBTQ young people, like this is a path that you can take to be able to improve and impact your community. And that kind of visibility can be very, very meaningful. It certainly was very meaningful for me. I think seeing people like Attorney General Tong in the role that he has, seeing other LGBTQ leaders, I think, again, kind of going back to what I was saying in the beginning, pushed my own imagination for myself, and was part of the paving the way and the encouragement to say, running for elected office is something that one way that I can impact my community as well.
Thank you. Beautifully done. Identity, like I said, is so complex, and it's there's so many pieces of us. When I think about bringing people in my own profession, I have to talk about, setting them up for success, right? So as you're talking about the recruitment of folks, and sometimes coming as the only and trying to bring people in and being your authentic self, as Kim said, the trust piece. What are some of the tools, and this is for everyone, so anyone can jump in now. What are some of the tools and resources that you feel like you're setting up, and also the institution or organization that you work for? What are those tools and resources that you're setting in place for the next? And anybody can jump in for that one.
One of the things that when I met with my national cohort, and I met this amazing group of AANHPI educators, and we are forming an affinity group for, I think that, I think Riju spoke to it briefly, how important those spaces are for for not just educators, for any marginalized communities to find your people. I see that with my children, and trying to find spaces for them where they feel seen is so important. So we as a cohort decided that, I think I could be wrong on the numbers, but I think the national percentage of AAPI educators is like 3%, maybe less than 3%, so it is so important for us to kind of build spaces, and how wonderful now that we can do a lot of this online. So that is a resource that we're actively in the process of building, because, when we are the only in our buildings, it's hard to kind of look out and try to find others, and to connect. So hopefully we'll be able to connect some of our early career educators as well, to support them.
That's great to hear. Anybody else? Quan?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think part of that too is knowing that when people come to you, or at least in my case, I work with students, and students have research questions, right? And students have questions about readings that I assign them to. But when we have conversations one-on-one, it's really important to hear what the people are saying, right? Even so, for me in the classroom, I have the power as an authority figure, but from thinking about building out space and making sure that not just me getting to express my authentic selves, but my own students getting to express their authentic selves, is to listen carefully to what they're bringing to the table, right? And oftentimes, those are the things that, if you only take a top-down perspective, as in here's, the reading, here are the 3 things that I want you to get from it, and that's all we're going to discuss today, that actually misses out the entire possibilities of being enlightened by the different ways in which people are reading the same kinds of things you're reading, right? But because of their different positionalities and experiences, they're bringing slightly different kinds of interpretation into that space. So for that kind of academic space, I'm always encouraging, because who knew? A kid who is of Korean descent, but was born and raised in Guatemala City, has a lot to say, right, about the formation of the Korean diasporic community in Guatemala. Up until I had a conversation with him, I completely did not know this, and it was part of my own, as someone who teach about Asian diasporas. For me, that is the gap in the literature, and that is the kid that we need to continue to do his research and to not doubt that what he comes up and what he experienced and what he's learned from his community is worthy of a serious research project, right? And so a lot of time, I think, is not just about maintaining the power, but actually it's about sharing that power and allowing yourselves, right, to be changed and learned and enlightened by what other people can bring in. So yeah, I think, what do we leave for others is actually the door wide open, and not feeling like you have to be a gatekeeper of sort, right? And I think that's kind of where real change, real meaningful conversations, and real diversity of voices can really emerge.
You don't know what you don't know, right? And
Mhm.
unless you're willing to listen, open your ears and listen, you're gonna miss out on so many great experiences and people and stories. And that's a great story. Leave the door wide open. Anybody else? I have one more question. Anybody else can answer this, tools and resources. I have one more question, and then I actually have a Q&A question ready to rock and roll. And if anybody else out there has a question for the panel, please drop it in the Q&A box and we will get to you. So as we think about that, tools, leaving the door open, finding these affinity spaces, creating these spaces, let's talk about community and how the community you serve or live in motivates you each day. Anyone jump? That's my favorite question about, that's what it's about. Go ahead, Ritu.
So last year or 2 years ago, we had a debate in Farmington about school holidays. And so South Asian families were trying to get Diwali on the school calendar. And so ultimately, Diwali was enacted on the school calendar. And so this is an issue that I work on in my civil rights work. And so it's, easy for employers to maybe add holidays or take out holidays on their calendar, because that's different than the school calendar, which operates within like state statute. You have to be done by June 30th. And if you're giving, South Asian holidays, are you going to give East Asian holidays like Lunar New Year? And are you going to then give Ramadan off for Muslim students? And so I understand the complexity of the issue. And so, I had a mixed bag on it. Like, I get, all the different perspectives. There are those that say add every holiday on. It doesn't matter if kids go to school until June 30th. There are those that say remove all holidays, including Christmas, or leave. And so I get all the different perspectives. So ultimately, Farmington decided to add the holiday, and I was very happy about that. But one of our Board of Ed members said to me, it was a tough decision because like 90% of the students in Farmington are Christian, and you've got a very small percentage that celebrate Diwali, and now we're closing down schools when most of the student population doesn't celebrate it. So I understood that and I appreciated that. A few months before that, State Rep Miriam Khan of Windsor, we had a discussion with her about state holidays and all that, and she said, we have to proceed carefully because we're so few in number. And so I think one of the things I appreciate about the community is we can be reasonable, like in trying to push for change and push for representation and advocacy. We want to break down barriers and break the glass ceiling and break down doors, keep them open for those who are coming behind us. But at the same time, I think we can proceed reasonably, carefully, with caution, understanding. One of the things I try to do in my community that I appreciate is, I have like white male friends who are super allies, like, yeah, we're going to fight for Diwali, and, we're going to fight for opening up new, Asian restaurants in town. And then I have like white male friends who are sometimes too comfortable talking about their feelings. Like, I don't like how certain things have become anti-white. And so, what I try to do is, if I'm going to expect empathy from those with privilege I don't have, then I think it's incumbent upon me to also, if I have a privilege, if I perceive to have a privilege, like if I have a white male friend telling me, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this direction, he must perceive me to have some sort of privilege for him to be that open with me. So I try to be empathetic with him. I had a white male friend who grew up in Bridgeport, and he would, during the George Floyd protests 4 years ago, he was telling me how he was opening up about how he went to an all minority school. He was like the one that was left out. That's a little bit different than, I think, a minority student being in an all white environment. Nonetheless, I was very empathetic to him, and we talked, and he told me about his feelings. And I think when we can do that, even if we perceive them to have privilege and be in the majority, if they have these issues, I think we can open up and understand, be empathetic, the same kind of empathy we expect from them. And I think that helps build a bigger community, right? If we can get them to speak our language. So like, I deal with cases where people bring forward cases like, I'm a male who has been victimized based on my gender. I'm a white person who has been victimized based on my race. Um, just look at it honestly, objectively, like, if we can get them to speak our language, initially it might seem like a shock, like, oh my goodness, you're making a mockery of the system. But at the same time, like, if we can get them to realize like the issues we've been facing and why we want to fight for change, if they're speaking our language, then I think we can come together like, hey, now that you as a white male are feeling victimized based on discrimination, now you know how we feel. Let's try and work our problems together out so we can, move forward as a community and help the next generation. And I think that's kind of the lessons I've learned in the work I've been doing, and seeing the way society has changed for better and worse in the last, several years. And, that's kind of how I want to continue forward.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. Anyone else have? Yeah, Caroline, go for it.
I really appreciate, Riju, what you just said. I think that certainly felt a part of my experience in the last 6 months. As part of this role is helping to be a steward of community conflict and disagreement, and that conflict, or people coming from different places, can be an opportunity, and seen as an opportunity versus something to avoid. I think has felt really right. And so I really appreciated your framing on that. And to answer your beautiful question, Adrian, I think community, the feeling of community, if magic is something that actually exists in the world, it is that feeling of community, that feeling of stepping outside of your door and knowing your neighbors, that building of community over time, by being in a place, I think is one of the most special feelings in the world. And I felt that in force a few years ago when JHD, Christine Kim, Annie Lynn, and a few others and I started API New Haven during the rise in anti-Asian violence. And I think there were two things that were incredibly meaningful to me during that time. One was just friendship and laughter. These three other amazing Asian women who were a few years older than me, who I admire so much, and just being able to share space together. I'd never been a part of a Asian identity group before, and I found that incredibly rewarding. And then two, just the infrastructure of API New Haven to be able to get things done, I think it was very powerful to see the power of community coming together to make things happen. The most recent initiative we were able to do is work with the mayor's office here in New Haven to officially proclaim May as API Heritage Month in the city. And with a real focus on supporting Asian-owned small businesses. We now have over 100 Asian-owned small businesses in New Haven, which is incredibly exciting. And so I think the dual feeling of the power of friendship and laughter and sadness and emotions that we were able to hold together as a group was powerful, as well as just, wow, when you get a group of people together, the things that we can do together in collaboration has been very meaningful and inspiring to watch.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. I'll allow one other person, if one other person wants to say something, and then I will get to the questions. But community is beautiful, and building it and being a part of it, keeps us going, keeps us alive. So go ahead, Kwan.
Yeah, I just want to echo Caroline's sentiment as well as Riju's. One of the things that I think is significant for me in terms of community is that there are different kinds of communities, right? There's the capital C community, which is often ones that are kind of institutionalized forms of community, and there are little C's communities. And I thrive in the little C's communities because those are ever building spaces. Those are always rich in learning spaces. And those are places that have so many delights in terms of how we find each other, how we come to a shared consensus of how to build community together. And I want to underscore that it's not easy work, right? It's relationship building and relationship maintaining, and that's something that you always have to work at it. You can't take it for granted. And it's been just my pleasure and luck to be able to work among my friends, my colleagues, and people in the Asian and Pacific American community in the state of Connecticut. Because for many years, I've been here for 18 years in Connecticut, and truly, I've actually, since the pandemic, I dipped. It was a low dip because I felt so isolated, so depressed by the kind of violence that was unfolding around us and the pain that was unfolding around it. But it was coming back into community, finding out community members, connecting with people that uplifted me out of that space. And that's something that I feel like we can all benefit from as we look around and see that we all have that need, right? To be connected to each other, and that to be able to have that connection is a gift.
Yeah, I agree. So thank you all. This has been an amazing webinar and space to be a part of. I've learned so much about you and from you, and so of the community members who are watching now and who'll be watching in the future. I do have one question. If anybody does have a question, has a question, please drop it in the Q&A. This is from Dawn. And she writes, I'll read her entire thing. This is an incredible and informative session. As an out trans woman who is not a part of your community, I heard so many parallels to our experiences in seeking authenticity and more than just representation. Thank you all, especially ACE, for organizing. I'm going to share the recording with my bosses where I work because we all need to do more to create truly inclusive workplaces. My question is, how has anyone on the panel dealt with combating unconscious bias among your non-AAPI colleagues? And I'll throw that out to anyone who wants to answer.
Well, I can certainly answer that, and this was especially evident before I even started my professional career. When I graduated from college, I mean, it's a good journalism school, USC. Everyone was getting like job offers left and right. I was doing the same thing, trying to send out my resume reel to all these different TV stations and whatnot. And usually you only hear from a handful. That's pretty normal for anybody going to any school. But my journey took a little bit longer than others because something I have noticed in my interviews with some of these news directors is they really like me, they want to have me on board, but for whatever reason the general manager of the station is looking somewhere else for whatever reason that may be. And that was something I've had happen to me about 3 times before I got my first job in Little Eureka, California. So we had to start real small for my career, as opposed to starting in a more known smaller market like Madison, Wisconsin, like where a few people went, for example. And it wasn't until much later in my career that this was something that was discussed when I attended the Asian American Journalists Association convention, was that there was this perception that the perception of the perpetual foreigner. Why would we want to put an Asian face in somewhere in South Dakota, for example, or perhaps in the Midwest, and that was kind of an unconscious bias that I was trying to push through and everything. Thankfully, that has gotten a lot better in terms of more acceptance, more focus on, the person's talents, what they bring to the table, rather than just looking at appearances, especially with TV news. And it was something that was discussed within AAJA because, there's still, a relative lack of Asian American TV journalists, especially Asian men, believe it or not. There's not that many outside of, say, like LA or Seattle or Hawaii, which is a whole different situation. You don't really have that many. So that's something I think that is continuing, you got to continue to work on. However, I do think, with everything that's happened within the last few years of really understanding diversity, really understanding, especially with the API community advocating for itself, I think the tides are changing in terms of, people wanting more willing to look at the talent pool that we have in our community in order to do journalism, whether it be in TV or in other mediums.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Raju?
Yeah. So on the question of unconscious bias, I look at this a lot. It's part of the work we do. And I think relatability is an important thing if you're trying to get people to see your perspective. I think trying to relate to them is really important because it helps them see it from their perspective. And so, sometimes I think the goal is to always try and unite perspectives as much as possible and find commonality between perspectives. Sometimes someone else's perspective is just not compatible with yours. Not to make it political, but I'll use abortion as an example. I think you're either for it or you're not. I think it's just a binary issue. There really is no middle ground. And so I think there are some issues that are just binary. There's just one side or the other. And, just one perspective is going to have to win out. Like, the Supreme Court, oftentimes they try to reconcile and harmonize competing interests. And sometimes it's just not possible. You're either, for religious rights or you're for marriage equality. And sometimes the Supreme Court will just pick a side. And so, but other times, I think most issues, I think, do lend themselves to multiple perspectives. So if we're talking about diversity and representation and discrimination, it's not just for, I think, people of color or women or LGBT. I think, it's an issue of whether you're marginalized and voiceless. And, sometimes, we overlook the fact that a lot of civil rights issues for marginalized and voiceless communities are poor people, disabled people. They can be, poor white families in a rural part of the country that, have nothing, and they're marginalized because of their income status, not necessarily because of their race. But and so I think in terms of unconscious bias, I think trying to get people to see your side often starts with being able to relate to them. And if you want them to speak your language, you can start by speaking their language. And I think that really helps because then they start to see that they do have a lot in common with you. You are being empathetic to them and you're not outright dismissing them for having a different life experience for you. You're not showing bitterness at them because they grew up rich or privileged. But you're really trying to work with them to create, get them to reduce their unconscious bias, whether they realize it or not. I think starting off by attacking them, calling them
Can I
bigots.
ask you, Riju, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
When you speak to that, and thank you, and I'm being cognizant of the time because we're about 10 minutes over. Is that something, I want you to relate it back to you. Is that something that you've learned based on your experience? Did you initially come from a space where you would become defensive and you learned to relate? Can you talk about it from your experience? I think that's what people really want to hear.
Yeah, I grew up in Farmington, very little diversity. And so, it was very hard to, be Indian. It just, you wanted to not talk about it. And sometimes when you're the only one, it can be really difficult because, you can either have the courage to just, be out there and be out front, But sometimes, when you have that kind of courage, people are very put off by it because they see you as trying to be in their face and, stick it to them. And so that doesn't always work. And so sometimes you have to be more passive, so you can try and build those bridges. But in being passive, maybe you're not really being yourself. Um, and so for me, I think what I've learned is, especially as I think society's just gotten so political and so divisive, is if you're trying to enact change, if you're trying to get through your policies that are important to you, and the people you care about, the people that are in the way are the people that have the unconscious bias. They just don't see your perspective because they maybe grew up in privilege, they don't have the empathy for helping people who are unlike them. And so, what I've learned is small changes, maybe not what we want, but it's good. Take whatever change we can get, take results, big or small, where we can get them, when we can get them, as big or small as we can get them, and just keep moving forward. And secondly, be relatable, speak language that people want to hear. So if, I work in civil rights, I'm not going to start off by talking about someone's unconscious bias because that's not language they'd understand. But even though it's what I'm trying to get at, what I'd start off talking about with them is, like, for example, my friend, who's white, grew up in Bridgeport, talking about that experience and how, he felt isolated and different. And so eventually, by speaking, trying to find language that the people who you need to convince so you can get change done, speak language that they can relate to, that they understand, not being judgmental necessarily, trying to embrace perspectives where it's possible to harmonize perspectives, and then taking those wins and moving forward with them.
Yeah, Kim?
I just wanted to quickly add, when I've, as it has taken me a long time to get comfortable with giving myself the grace to set boundaries. That's something that, I think as one, usually, the only one in a building or in a workplace, is that there are days when I don't have it in me to educate. I don't have it in me. So I've given myself that grace to say, I'm just gonna let that one slide. But then there are other days where I feel like I can gently, maybe because these are people that I work with, that I can say, oh, can you say that again? Or did you mean for it to sound that way? When I became Teacher of the Year, I had several people say to me, oh, I was elected, shortly after the Stop Asian Hate. A lot of people said, oh, well, good timing, this is working out great for you. And I'm like,
All your years of work, and it would just, yeah.
right.
You checked off the box.
Yeah. So then I'm like, but occasionally, I would mention that to a friend, and they would say, oh, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to sound that way. But to really just give yourself that grace to some days you're going to have it in you that you can, educate your coworker and do it kindly. But if you're not feeling like you can, I feel like if I can't show up in a patient, kind manner, I just will just kind of let it slide over me.
And sometimes flipping the script, if I just add one more thing, Adrian, I know we're running out of time.
Yeah,
sometimes flipping the script helps, and sometimes going on the offense helps. To Kim's point, the discussion about affirmative action, why is it always, as soon as, like a person of color gets into a good school, it's like, oh, I know why they got in. That's like the first thing people think about. But how about like when Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, got into Harvard? His grades were not that good according to his teachers, right? His father bought his way into the school. So sometimes when, you have people with an unconscious bias saying, well, hey, we know why, Kim got Teacher of the Year, the timing was great, or, we know why this person got into this great school. Well, let's flip the script. Wait a second, how about all the times when this person who looks just like you is unqualified got in? Where was the, calling them out for checking that box? At the same time, how come there are these affinity bars? It sounds like it's these affinity groups, they perpetuate racism because it keeps people, together rather than like getting them to know other people. Well, that's like identity politics. You guys are always pushing identity politics. Well, wait a second. You guys started it. You guys started it with your all white country clubs. You guys started it by banning interracial marriage. You guys started it by banning same sex marriage. The identity politics started with you. It didn't start with us. We're now trying to correct it and undo it. And so I think sometimes going on the offense and flipping the script. I had this discussion with my uncle where, he's a conservative guy. He was asking me like, hey, how come, my daughter, his daughter, my cousin rather, you know, uh, she is on campus, with, these affinity groups. And, like, how does that help? Well, my answer was, well, the reason why we have to have these affinity groups is because, like, you guys, like, shut us out. Like, you guys shut us out from your country clubs. You guys shut us out from, jobs saying, like, these people need not apply. Right. And so we now have to do this to kind of undo those historical inequities, those historical problems. And he kind of stopped himself. I didn't convince him, but he did stop, and he sort of started to say, well, okay, but now, are you guys, is that overcorrection on your part? Nonetheless, there was a bell that rang in his head, I could tell. And so I think, we can't be on the defensive all the time. Sometimes we have to go on the offense politely and, respectfully, so we don't put them off, but making them realize, like, hey, the unconscious bias, it didn't start with us. We're trying to undo the problems.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And thank you. It is 12:46. So I just want to say at the end of it, there's some key words that I heard: setting your boundaries, finding joy in community, even during the hard times, finding empathy, even when people don't understand you, you know, continuing to push your voice forward, even if someone doesn't understand how important the story is. It's important to you. It's important to people. People are watching. You are the person that they see. And that is why we have these panels. That's why we have you all representing in your various institutions, because when you are seen, other people are seen. And it's so important to have your voices out in the ethers and out in communities, so people know, hey, what Caroline said, I can do that too. This is a pathway for me. So I think, bringing all of that together, that piece at the end of having a community and being a part of that community, and resetting yourself in that community so that you can go out and still do the work, whether you ask to do it or not, so I thank all of you for being here today. I think our viewers for being here today. This has been an amazing panel. As I said, I told people that before, they did not want to miss this panel because they would learn so much from you all. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be a part of this. So thank you everyone for tuning in. You can watch this again on WHCI YouTube. Jen has dropped the link in the chat. So take that out and reshare it. And we appreciate you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.